Right. Good afternoon, everybody. I believe Good afternoon. Has the live stream been started? Yes. Thank you. Welcome to this meeting of Herefordshire Council Audit and Governance Committee being held on Monday, the 27th of June, 2022. For those present in the meeting room, if the fire alarm sounds, please leave the building by the nearest exit and make your way to the fire assembly point in the car park. The agenda papers and other relevant information for this meeting are available for public viewing on the Herefordshire Council website. The Council is streaming this meeting live on the Herefordshire Council YouTube channel and is making a recording. To ensure that recording quality is maintained, please speak as clearly as possible and keep background noise to a minimum. Please ensure that mobile phones and other devices are turned to silent. Others are permitted to film, photograph and record public meetings, providing that it does not disrupt the business of the meeting. If there are any members of the public present who do not wish to be filmed or photographed, please raise your hand now so that any person filming or photographing may be made aware. Only committee members present in the meeting room may vote. We have a number of people in attendance as virtual participants. Can I request that they use the raise hand function within the system if they wish to contribute and to introduce themselves when they are called upon. Thank you. So I'll move to the first item on the agenda. Apologies for absence. Apologies for absence have been received from Councillor Polly Andrews and also from Ms. Gail Radcliffe-Turner. Are there any named substitutes? I don't believe any have been identified. I'd like to just take this opportunity to welcome Councillor Claire Davis to the committee, and hopefully you'll find it an enjoyable and rewarding time spent on audit and governance.
Thank you.
I'd also like to welcome Mr. Peter Barber from Grant Thornton. Yes.
Thank you, Chair.
As your first appearance on behalf of Grant Thornton to our committee. So moving on to agenda item 3, declarations of interest. Does any member wish to declare any Schedule 1, Schedule 2 or any other interest in any agenda item? No. In which case, agenda item 4. The minutes of the meeting held on the 10th of May are included in the agenda, page 11 to 23, for approval. No matters of accuracy have been notified to the monitoring officer. I'm going to abstain from voting on them because I wasn't present for all of the items on the agenda. But are you content that I sign the minutes as an accurate record? Yes, thank you. The committee's action log is attached to the minutes, pages 25 to 27. And I believe we have this as a A3 document in front of us. Does any committee member wish to comment on any item on the action log? Yes. Councillor Robertson.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a few questions. I'm not quite sure if you want me to take them one by one or if other committee members have got points on it as well. The first one, action item number 91, and we've got a number of actions relating either to corporate risk register or the head of corporate performance, and as a result, a number of the due dates have been pushed out to November. So I just wanted to get an understanding of when we might have a new head of corporate performance, because many of the actions are really dependent on this. That's my first question.
Right, shall we Shall we deal with the questions one by one? Otherwise, I suspect we'll get lost. I'm not sure. Andrew, well, yes.
Chairman, I'm happy to give an update. We have made an offer of employment to a person to be the new head of corporate performance. He has accepted, but I don't think they have a start date yet. He has to work his notice from his current employer, which is civil service. We have an interim head of performance, a lady called Appy, who is in at the moment helping us with that, and will hand transfer over to the new appointee. So Appy is in post at the moment, so the committee wanted we could come to say your September meeting, if that would help.
So we could potentially, I guess, then challenge this November 22 date and say, is it any way that some of them can be brought forwards, given that there is someone in post?
We have a July meeting as well, is it?
I'd have to check with the team because and to get papers ready for your July meeting, that they almost need to be done this week to go through the system. So I wouldn't want to make that commitment without checking with the team that they could on that. But you have got a September meeting.
Indeed, but okay.
I think September might work well because that was initially indicated by Paul Walker when we might see the strategic risk register as well. So it could all culminate together if that would be, that could be achievable. Could you just repeat the name of the interim, please?
A lady called Appy, and I can't remember her surname, so I'll make sure for the minutes we provide.
Thank you. Right.
It's Appy Ready. R-E-W-Y. Sorry.
Thank you.
Thanks,
I wanted to pick up on the same item, but just to explore this a little bit further. When things get deferred, I think there is a question mark in my mind of the importance of those. In other words, we're asking that they're deferred, but maybe we should be looking at whether or not we can wait till that point in time, because otherwise something should be picked up by somebody else or moved on. And if you look at, I mean, that first item was November 21. You know, it's now going to be November 22. That's a year. Now, is that actually a risk, or is that something that actually has value? Because if it's taking a year to do it, it almost questions why we're seeking it, or why hasn't it been done before and picked up by somebody else? And I think there's one or two of those items here where a certain amount of slippage is acceptable, but there must come a point at which one queries the very essence of the item that's there.
You're right. I'm not sure we're not necessarily the best place to say what priority some of these items might take. I'd looked probably to either internal or external audit to guide us perhaps on some of those items, but it's not something we've asked them to do before. Peter, would you like to comment on that?
I'm happy to comment, Chair. I mean, in terms of actions, clearly, the whole with any weaknesses in arrangements, there needs to be a judgment made to whether the effort required to address the concern is commensurate with the benefits. Because as a council, you've got lots of competing priorities, you've got limited resources, you've got limited financial capacity as well, and therefore, in the old days when, dare I say, councils were awash with money and they were able to implement everything that was requested of them, those have long gone, and a decision needs to be made when receiving recommendations and responding to them, what is realistic and achievable and what is the priority. In this case, a decision has been made that action needs to be taken and a target date given. My view would be if that target date is missed, then you as those charged with governance should be challenging that, understanding why circumstances may have well moved on. And if you're not comfortable that sufficient progress has been made, then clearly officers need to be held to account and greater pressure exerted to ensure that that is done in the most timely manner possible, recognising with things like appointments, if I come across lots of councils, for example, that have vacancies within the financial part of the council, because trying to attract the right people with the right skill set is becoming increasingly difficult. So just because a date has been set, it isn't unreasonable for it to be revisited. But ultimately, this committee is there to ensure that appropriate progress is being made. And if the original response is no longer deliverable, whether an alternative approach is more sensible.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think that very much bears out what I was suggesting, and I'm grateful for the comment.
I suppose we have to, I have to then ask the committee whether they consider that although we've got a due date of November, that September is acceptable.
Can I suggest, I think there becomes a sort of principle here, where it might be that if something slips by 6 months, we actually have to query whether it's something that still has relevance. In other words, I think you could almost put that into it, you review it and say, does this still have a relevance? I mean, the 6 months might be it's a bit of an arbitrary figure, and I'm plucking it out the air for the sake of having a discussion now. But otherwise, I'm sort of really questioning that if something can be put off by a year, is it still important? And a little bit, I'll cast that back to officers who might be able to give me a better answer than I'm floundering in the dark looking at it and saying, what's going to happen? And why isn't this picked up by the interim or by a deputy or by somebody else, if indeed it was deemed of importance by this committee?
Andrew, would you like to comment on that?
Yes, Jack. It is a very important issue we're talking about here, and one of the things that we came to light as soon as we appointed the interim arrangement here is we need to do better, and that's what API has been charged with doing. So there have been considerable improvements in what's happening behind the scenes, but on the officer side of the table of these things, and that's what API will update you with when we get to in front of you in September. But it's a fair point about the timing of it. As Pete said, there's lots of competing challenges here, but it's something that is important to us.
I think Peter, your comments are, they're reflected in another area of the agenda that we'll come on to later, in the internal audit, the internal audit recommendations, because there is concern, certainly in my mind, over the delay in delivering some of those, and exactly the same question then arises: if they've been delayed 12, 18 months, were they so important that they needed to be a recommendation, or should we be more forceful in asking for officers to be brought to answer why they haven't delivered? Are we content to park this one for now and move on? Because I know Councillor Balderson has more questions. And
Chair, I'm perfectly happy to park this now, bring it back September with paper that will say a little bit of something about all of these things that have been delayed. That would be really helpful.
yeah, thank you. Councillor Balderson.
Thank you. I'll try and whiz through them. Number 94, and I promise I'm not speaking on every action number. I would just like to see an example of the business plan, if possible, just evidence that that action, so we can evidence ourselves that action has been taken before we report it as complete. If that's possible, that would be appreciated. Number 97, the rethinking governance team has now been concluded, so I would suggest that perhaps action 97 needs to be the scrutiny management board as opposed to the rethinking governance group. My next points are around section 106, which I think pick up on numbers 101 and 102. Section 106 matters seem to be popping up everywhere. It's coming up again later in our agenda. It was in the financial outturn report earlier in May. So I'm not quite sure whether we can potentially, whether we need to go in a bit more of a deep dive into sort of what's going around section 106, because I know I've been chasing you, Andrew, for a very long time, and I know you're quite busy, but I mean, I've got some questions here. I mean, it says that we're getting an external provider, but I don't understand why we need an external provider to provide training around Section 106, because my understanding is that we need to understand how it's working within Herefordshire Council. And because I know I've got lots of people within my ward struggling to use their Section 106 funding and actually, you know, spend the funds.
Lucky you getting it.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And also, you know, 102 is talking about the spreadsheet, and you know, it was raised in, you know, Peter's point, it was raised in September 21, and we're now in July, and you know, things don't seem to be moving. So I guess it's a general question around Section 106 and whether, you know, the status of it, and really whether we need to, as a governance group, look at what's happening in it in a bit more detail.
So I'm very happy to pick up. And Section 106 is a challenge for the council. And it was last summer at this committee, it was raised here. It went to Cabinet in November last year. We had, at that point, just over £9 million of Section 106 money in the bank on there. And the decision of Cabinet was to clear that backlog and also look at the processes we use going into the future to avoid creating another backlog going forward. The processes to clear the backlog, they're ongoing. We have appointed an external company to help clear the backlog, as in do the designs, understand what the letter of the 106 agreement says, because quite a few of them we find when we get into detail, there's a bit of urban myth, well, we thought it said that. Well, actually, when you dig out the 106 agreement, very prescriptive. So that's been a significant piece of work for officers and the external consultants that we appointed to do that. They are very near the end of that process, and it says in here there are meetings being scheduled with members in September to take them through. So we'll do area by area. We will sit down with members, take them through what was in the 106 agreements in terms of the money in the bank and the schemes that have been designed by the external advisors to work through to make sure everybody's aware of it. And then obviously it was socialised wider with parish councils and town councils. So that's a big piece of work that's ongoing on there. And that phase will come to that stage in September. The information on the website isn't up to date and it isn't completely easy to navigate, but part of that has been getting everything in order behind the scenes to get that populated. So that will be put onto the website so everybody can see what the 106 agreements are in their area, what it's for, time limits and those type of things. The piece of work we're talking about, the consultants, is about changing how the council deals with developer contributions. So 106 are part of those. And for the council to be clear of what it aspires for in terms of developer contributions, which then helps council sitting on the planning committee to make sure that those things are translated into the 106 agreements. So that's the second phase of that work. That was the second phase that Cabinet asked us to look at, which we're looking at. We haven't got a date yet for when that will be reported back to Cabinet, but that will be probably October. That's what we're going to be working on. That's certainly when all the work will have been done to change the processes. So it will be much more of a corporate approach to development contributions in terms of defining strategically what the council wants and its other partners, so health and those arrangements. So we have greater clarity. In fact, the master plan for those, which will then inform the planning process. So when planning permissions are sought, negotiations are happening with developers, that it provides greater clarity. So there's an awful lot of work going on behind the scenes. And I suppose one of the questions for this committee and other committees, which is the most appropriate committee for it next to appear at, because obviously the Cabinet will get a progress report. It may want to go from the scrutiny meetings or back to this committee. So as officers, we're in your hands as to where best for it next to appear for members to have a look at the process rather than that 106 scheme or this 106 scheme.
Yeah, because I know I've got two groups who have got they've got invoices, but they're just not getting the money. So that they're jumping over the hoops, but we're just not. I don't know what the stumbling blocks are in order to actually give them the money, because they've actually spent it and they've submitted their invoices. They're just not being paid.
Without going into individual schemes, there's one or two where there are further queries about how that money was spent. So the procurement process to get to appointing whoever it's going to pay for. So there's queries going back to the groups to provide that clarity. So that's the one I think we're talking about, that there are conversations going on with people to provide further evidence to to clarify where that money is going and how it's defrayed.
So does that mean we need to refer to scrutiny or agree how the section 106 action that's being?
Well,
Followed up.
my concern is that there's an action, as you say, Councillor Bolderson, in respect of an action outstanding from September 21, which and a facility to access publicly available information. I'm of the opinion that an information session for councillors on section 106 is well overdue, would be welcomed by all. Won't give all the answers, but we're letting excellent be the enemy of the good if we don't actually get on, perhaps. And I will write to the chief executive to ask that something be done in July, so that at least councillors with section 106s in their wards have the ability to have insight into the details of that section 106. Whether or not the public realm contribution, which I think is the one, Andrew, you were specifically referring to in terms of the external contractors dealing with plans for, is it right?
It's for all of them. So we have public realm, which is about half of that money, 9 million. Then there's a lot of work to do with education, sports, leisure, liaison with NHS. So it's across the whole board. The contractor we've appointed is dealing with all of them, designing all of the schemes, apart from some of the specific education as well. Education colleagues are dealing directly with those.
I think that ward councillors actually have a huge role to play in inputting into those schemes, together with their parish councils and wards. And from personal experience, that's a very stretching but rewarding role for them to play. And I'm sure we can come to, what I have a concern of is that external consultants are going to go away and come up with their wizard schemes, but not actually relate them to any of the local wishes of parishes and all councillors. I don't know whether that concern is reflected across the board, but it's something I have in my mind. I will speak with Councillor Bolton outside the meeting and any other councillor who wants to input, and then we'll perhaps come forward with a request for a 1 hour or 1.5 hour presentation from somebody involved with at the coalface with section 106. So at least everyone's brought up to a current level of understanding of where we are with 106, what the problems are, and what is in their own wards. Because I suspect that there will be that this section 106 will have impact on certain wards, but not so much on others. So it's not a common concern, but we do seem to be struggling with delivering anything on it. Councillor John.
Yeah, I just warned against that assumption that you just made. I think the problem with section 106 at the moment, of course, is that you only get section 106 agreements above a certain amount of development. And as Andrew and I have had quite some correspondence recently, even when you get that number, you find you don't even get a section 106 agreement at the end of it. So there is a lot here that needs digesting. And the biggest problem is that for larger communities, you may get your section 1. Small communities, the chances of getting any section 106 money is virtually zero, because you don't get developments the right size. And if they are the right size, then there's enough loopholes in the system to avoid any payment. So there's a lot of interest from the smaller wards and smaller parishes who would very much like to see some of the money coming into theirs, because they're getting the growth of housing in 1s and 3s and 8s and 9s, but not any accompanying money that goes with it. So the net effect is on medical facilities, recreation facilities, educational facility, no money. So there's considerable interest from the smaller wards as to what this pot of money is and does. And I would remind you that there is also on the books at the moment, have been there for a long time, the other consideration of the other form of taxation on development that was raised and put on by a members event, wasn't it? It came up.
Notice of motion, I think.
Yeah, a notice of motion, thank you. And that's still sitting there. Now that would apply across all housing, as I understand it, in development, and might really have a real interest for these smaller wards who are suffering as a consequence.
I think, thank you for that contribution, Councillor Jenner. I think it raises 2 points. One is that we've got £9 million in the bank at the moment.
Yeah.
That we do need to get out, because some of it will have, it is all time limited money, essentially.
Yes.
So we do need to get that out. The other matter in relation to smaller parishes, smaller developments, relates, I think, to SIL. And those members who are members of the previous administration will recall having gone through a lot of meetings about SIL. We had yet more external consultants advising us on SIL, and
I'm too young to remember that.
No, I realise that, Councillor Gender. The outcome of which was SIL wasn't anyway going to be inflicted on developments, certain single developments. And I think my memory fails me on what size of it. But perhaps it would be useful, following that motion, that we have that could be a brief update as well on why we're not implementing SIL at the current time. Because I couldn't give you the precise reason why, and I think all councils should be in possession of that fact. So we'll include that within the scope of the meeting. Councillor Bolton,
Only four more, I'm afraid. My next one was 122. The new transformation director to be invited to meet with your governance committee. When I last looked at the organisational chart, I see that there is no transformation director in the organisational chart attached to the constitution. So I think I guess my question would probably more be suited to the CEO. I'm not quite sure if there's anyone in the room that can answer, or if there's anyone online. I'm not quite sure who's online, with the status of this and why there's no longer a transformation director in our organisational chart on the constitution.
I don't see Andrew putting his hand up at the moment, but would you like to try and answer that, or would you wish me to put it in writing to the chair?
I think it's probably better to put it in writing. There are things that are being looked at from an HR point of view, but I don't think it's for me to say exactly where we are. But I'm sure Paul will be able to give you a written response.
Like then you're keeping a record of increasing workload following that.
One thing though, Andrew. Sorry, 125. The section 151 of the exploring report back to the committee on who in the council undertakes carbon audit, with update requested in our due date.
I'm embarrassed. I haven't found out who has carried out the carbon audit, so I'm trying to get to the bottom of that. I haven't to date, but I chased again hard today to find out. We have had one apparently, but it wasn't SWAT that carried out.
Perhaps we can put July.
I was hoping by the end of this week. Got an annual leave on.
Report by
email.
Yes,
fine.
yeah.
Okay, 126 was just the skills matrix, I believe. So discussed at group leaders meeting, agree this would be implemented as soon as possible, training to be scheduled. But my understanding is that it was us pulling together a skills matrix to understand whether we had the right skills or whether we needed further training or whether we needed to plug in gaps. So whether training is required for that, I was just sort of pushing back on the progress update and whether it was actually achieving what we were hoping the action to be.
So Councillor Bolton, I'll take that question. There are two skills matrix that are currently being developed. One is the ANG we've adopted at October's meeting last year, which you could implement, and that was agreed with group leaders. There is then the broader all members skills matrix, which I will put my hand up and say that is with me. I'm going to ask for some latitude. We've had a few changes to the staff recently, and I've had to prioritise a few things. It is important. I'll say I'll come back hopefully in July meeting to confirm where that is. The overall skills matrix is going to be taken to the members working group though for their input.
Members working groups,
Members
development group.
working.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Is that acceptable?
Okay, yes, thank you. And it's just then on us to
Well,
do our own skills. matrix.
Following on from that, I was going to say, following on from that, there's no impediment then for us doing our own skills matrix, which is if my memory serves me correctly, and it's nearly a year, I think, since we last covered it. It's a self-marking exercise with us being as truthful as positive as we can in order to really look at where we have gaps in our knowledge and how best we can do that. So probably it is for Ben to circulate that. I think we did have a format that we were largely content with.
We had agreed on a format, and we're just waiting for constitutional changes to be agreed at full council.
Yeah.
And also, I think we had our last member confirmed yesterday on stage. So now that we know the full committee, I think we could move forward on it and set it in a date.
Yeah. So Ben, if you could look that out. If it could be circulated, I don't think we need, although the 2 new members to committee may want to contact me to ask me about why we're doing it and the background to it. I think it's probably won't take anybody too long to complete. We could either look at putting it, doing it in time for the July meeting, but that's probably a bit too soon. Probably September again. September.
Now, just 2 more points, Chair. 129. Information relevant, internal audit information relevant to scrutiny committees to be distributed, and we've got November 22 as a due date, and I just want to push back on that if possible, because I think all scrutiny committees are doing their work planning at the moment. So ideally, if we do have an interim in place, that they really should be working with our statutory scrutiny officer sooner rather than later. So ideally, I'm comfortable with the November due date on that, and would ask that it be brought forward. I don't know what due date then we would like.
Yeah, I just want to clarify, what are we anticipating to be resolved from the action? That information relevant on who decides whether they're relevant internal audit recommendations to be circulated regularly to scrutiny committee members. I this morning met the children's scrutiny committee, where I did suggest that item 8 on our agenda would be something that they might want to reflect upon in their work planning, given that it contains internal audit recommendations which haven't necessarily been delivered, both Schedule 2 and Schedule 3 level sort of recommendations, that they might find those of interest. Is that what we're envisaging?
I think so, but it's the statutory scrutiny officer formalising a process, perhaps where on a more regular basis they are made aware of what internal audits might be occurring and what recommendations are coming out of those internal audits over their particular directorates, and how it could be influencing any items on their work programming, and then also the following up of it. So it's the process and making sure that it's something that will happen on a regular basis.
That's that's something I think that should be able to happen before November. Can we push back on that and say, can we not come up with a process, given that, by the time November comes, and given we've got PERDA next year, they probably won't have more than 2 or 3. If they're meeting once every 2 months, so we'll have more than 2 or possibly 3 more scrutiny committee meetings before they come to
Check.
a natural
Yes,
end.
I take the
So-
point. I'll go away, speak to colleagues of that, and we'll get that done as fast as we can, and I'll update the committees to that time. Yeah.
Again, we don't want to be, excellent to the end of the year. Good. I think some information would be better than none. So reflecting on which internal audits are relevant, but we'll rely on officers' interpretation.
There's a judgment call to be made, and we need to set the parameters for those judgments.
Councillor
Right, maybe I'm not sure whether it's overthinking or underthinking that during that discussion, but my initial interpretation of relevant was relevant to each committee rather than somebody trying to make a value judgment on whether it was a relevant recommendation. So it's just literally just going, that's connected communities, that's children's, that's adults, and that's environment. Rather than trying to put value judgments on them. And when we started this process, I was also under the impression that this was then going to be much more of a public updated part of the scrutiny web pages that we've been anticipating. And that it was also a tool that the Scrutiny Management Board would be using in its entirety to find out whether there were cross-cutting themes. So I guess what I'm trying to say in this is it feels part of a bigger piece of work as much as being a particular action on its own, and part of that is getting those scrutiny web pages up to date.
And I think the statutory scrutiny officer has picked up a lot of those wider, like they've picked up the risk registers and made sure that the scrutiny committees have got those with their work programming. But one of the things that hasn't come through yet are these recommendations, which Nigel was able to pick up this morning, at least for children's and community health and wellbeing. Last point, conversely, 140 is July. Deadline realistic. I think perhaps it needs to be a date further in the future, unless there's I'm not understanding the action point appropriately, and that's me on the actions, Chair.
Yeah, perhaps a comment. I think the owners, the Director of Public Health, I'm let me just reread this. This has been taken forward to the Constitutional Office.
Talking about the fact that the big economic plan is not until December
Yeah.
and considered by Cabinet in 2023, and we've got a 29th of July 22 deadline.
Yeah, and we're next considering our annual government statement, a draft statement in September, I believe, anyway. I'm not sure who has put the 29th of July, so if the owner of the actions put the 29th of July, who are we to argue with their ownership? But again, if we go back and query, given the scope of the work, querying whether that can be adequately released by the 29th, and yeah, we have a draft next government statement in September. That might be more appropriate to refer to that. I've been asked to pause the meeting for 10 minutes while the live stream is configured, as we seem to have some problems with the live stream on YouTube. So we're just going to take a 10-minute break. Reconvening at 10 to 3. Thank you.